But we're a little tighter today, but the family unit's together. Yeah, a little different than Wednesday night, too, when I was here and Phil was there and Mona was there.
And then there were the occasional call and things.
Yeah. Well, we need to continue on with the study of Galatians. And I'm going to ask for the Lord's guidance and blessing. Father, thank you for this opportunity to study this book that is really a difficult book. And Lord, we see Paul's heart as he pours it out for those that he had taught. You're in the kingdom through Messiah Yeshua. You're part of the commonwealth of Israel through Messiah Yeshua. And then they begin to step back and say, maybe there's more I have to do. Father, may we have our eyes open to understand the book correctly, to see that Messiah Yeshua is totally sufficient for our righteousness. He is the faithful one. But in no way did he or Paul tell us that obedience to you was wrong. Thank you that you call us to obedience. Thank you that your apostles have said, be holy as your Father in heaven is holy. We take the righteousness of the Master Yeshua and we set ourselves apart to be your children. We pray in the name of the righteous one. Amen. So it is tough to hang on to the argument from week to week, and I find that particularly I don't know, I'm so I'm working on maps all week, or working on a layout on a book that we're writing, but at Biblical Backgrounds, and I come back to Galatians. I say, whoa, where were we? So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to step you through the outline of chapter 1 and chapter 2 again, but we'll try to capture the argument that was given. Well, just look briefly at the outline of chapter 3, and then step into where we were in 4. But the reason I'm explaining this is I went ahead and threw in the first 7 verses of 4 that we looked at the end of last week, because I felt we needed them to move on. And so we'll just move through those rapidly. We move through all these introductory slides rapidly, and then we'll be into new material. So as we entered Galatians chapter 3, Paul, after really 2 historical chapters where he was discussing a lot of his interaction with the Galatian people, his own history with Jerusalem, with the apostles in Jerusalem. We entered chapter 3 and he put out the question, how did you receive the Spirit of God? By law or by faith? When I was with you, as you new Gentiles came to faith in Messiah, did God give you his Spirit by you obeying the law, or by your faith in the faithful one? Paul argues that we receive the Spirit by faith, not by works. He argues the significance and permanence of the Abrahamic covenant. And then he says, Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. That's what it is for all of you. And he said, the righteous shall live by faith, pulling that out of Habakkuk. Well, that leaves a problem. What is the purpose of the law? Paul said the law provides a knowledge of sin. Oh, it provides a knowledge of sin. So is that contrary to God? No, not at all. Because we discover God's great rescue when we know what sin is. And I stop there for a moment because I've often said to you, I've said to others, many churches just have, here's a list of requirements. This is what we view as sin. Never opening up the scriptures to see what God views as sin. And so it's not too hard in a lot of churches to be righteous, because you just got to keep that list. But when you start seeing what God views as sin, you say, oh, wow, I do need a righteous one. I do need somebody who's faithful, the faithful one. So he says, no, the law is not contrary to God's promises. It's God's mind. It's his thoughts. He didn't say all this, but this is what it's good. It's correct. This is his instruction for life. And the law serves as a tutor. It was keeping us until Messiah would come. The law taught us our need for Messiah. And so we retranslated this verse. Instead of just using faith, 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 which sounds very much like, and before faith came, before my faith came, we were kept in custody under the law, being shut up to the faith, to the faith that was about to be revealed. It's actually set up this way in the Greek, the about to be revealed faith, faithfulness. Therefore the law has become our tutor to lead us to Christ, so that by faith, that's the way we see it, we may be justified. But since justified, I've explained this before, since justified, when it's a noun, it's translated as righteousness. When it's a verb, they translate it as be justified. I like be declared righteous. So that's why I shift every justified to be declared righteous. But here's what I think is really going on, because this article is dropped out, and I don't know that article is represented in most translations. And so, but before the faithfulness came, what faithfulness? The faithfulness demonstrated by Messiah Yeshua. We were kept in custody under the law, being shut up to the about to be revealed faithfulness. The faithfulness of Messiah Yeshua. Therefore the law has become our tutor to lead us to Christ, so that by his faithfulness we might be declared righteous. I really think that's a better translation, and I know that's being very bold because it goes in the face of so many other translations. But you can take, that you don't have to write that down and say this is the correct translation. You can just say, he's a pompous guy. In Messiah we are God's children and Abraham's descendants. That's the way the chapter finished. And so then we're moving on to chapter 4, the first 7 verses. How can anyone become a son of God? And so Paul gave us an analogy. An heir must come of age. The reality, Messiah brings us of age. Our status. See, he's describing some of that stuff we were talking about, when the about to be faithfulness was revealed. So Messiah brings us of age. Our status, we are sons by the Spirit of God's Son. So I'm going to read, and I'm going to read, and please hang on. We will get to where we're actually studying together. So the first 3 verses, I say, an heir must come of age. This is the analogy. An heir must come of age. Now I say, as long as the heir is a child, he does not differ at all from the slave, although he is owner of everything. But he is under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. So also we, while we were children, were held in bondage under the elemental things of the world. Paul explains by this new analogy how a pagan God-fearer, proselyte, or native-born Jew becomes an heir of the promise of God. So pagan, God-fearer, proselyte, or native-born Jew, everybody becomes an heir of the promise of Abraham in the same way. The child may be an heir of everything in the father's estate, but until he comes of age, he cannot use or dispose of any of the estate any more than a servant in the estate can. So we're not talking spiritual ideas right now. We're talking very physical ideas. This is the way it is. He remains under the guardianship of the estate. That's what you were. You were under the guardianship of God's law, which was a tutor. What does verse 3 mean? So while we, while we were children, were held in bondage under the elemental things of the world. As Jews who claim the promise to Abraham by birth, Paul says, we too were heirs held in bondage because we could not claim the kingdom. That's not what verse 3 means, but I'm saying that, trying to set up. But how was the Jewish nation in bondage under the elemental things of the world? We're not really sure, but Paul could certainly be referring to the nation's own previous history of enslavement in Egypt, its periods of apostasy with idolatry. Just read the books of Kings, read the books of Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and you see great periods of apostasy and idolatry. Read the latter prophets, and you see the problem with Israel's apostasy and idolatry. Or perhaps he's speaking of the exile, of which it says in the Torah, and the Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the others, and there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your fathers have known. Held in bondage under the elemental things of the world. So I'm saying the Jews were held in bondage under the elemental things of the world.
My Bible's got some notes here that I think I understand a little bit better too. A tutor, that is a guardian and guide of boys. Among the Greeks and Romans, the name was applied to trustworthy slaves who were charged with the duty of supervising the life and morals of boys belonging to the better class. The boys were not allowed so much as to step out of the house without them arriving at the age of manhood.
Yeah, that's a very good description. I thought about running something like that in, but I thought I would try to abbreviate that. But go ahead, continue, please, if you.
Well, then it says no longer under a schoolmaster. This may be better rendered to no longer under the need of the schoolmaster, as a student continues to embrace the teaching of his schoolmaster after graduation.
Yeah.
A sincere believer embraces the law after coming to the faith of Messiah.
Yes. Yeah, and so I think that's explained very, very well what I did not explain so well, and that's that the law is this guardian, this tutor, and we don't need to talk in terms of Roman, Greek, higher levels, and that's what Paul was reflecting when he was using this terminology, is that, and I tried to express in that. The son could be, he's the heir of the estate, but he can't do anything with it because he's under this guardian or this tutor who really controls everything he does until the son comes of age. Yeah. Okay. Did we finish this one or not really? Yeah, I think we did. So we need to move on. So Galatians 4 through 5, but when the fullness of time comes, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those who are under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. The common translation, were under the law, is not correct. It is a present verb, who are under the law. So Jews are under the law. Paul says, even we Jews receive the adoption of sons through Messiah Yeshua. How so? The influencers, those who are trying to influence the God-fearers, hey, become Jewish. How so? The influencers ask. So I'm saying understand under the law, this term under the law, to mean Jewish. God sent forth his Son, the Messiah, born of a woman, that is, born as a man, born under the law, that is, born Jewish, so that he might redeem those who are under the law, that is, Jews, that we might receive the adoption as sons. The influencers who depended on their Jewish status, in truth, received sonship by redemption of God's Son, who was born Jewish and perfectly fulfilled God's law. Now, we opened this up and talked about it last week at as we finished up the class. I'm just trying to get to new material. And so we dealt with that one. That was in terms of outline. That was, so we, remember my outline there. The analogy, an heir must come of age. He's under the tutor until he comes of age. And the reality is Messiah brings us of age. And then our status, sons by the Spirit of God's Son. Because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Therefore you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God. So, of course, I'm giving you my expanded translation. Because you are sons, through the redemption of God's Son, God sent forth the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, that is, our mind, our intellect, our will, and reason, crying, Abba, Father, just as the Son cried out in His prayers. Therefore, you are no longer a slave, or no longer this child waiting to come of age, or an heir waiting to come of age, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God. So the status of all who believe, Jew, Greek, Roman, American, slave, free, male, female, is sonship in the kingdom, heirs of the promise of God through the faithfulness of Messiah Yeshua. We're ready to move on. How can God-fearers combine sonship with paganism is what Paul is asking now. So, Vicki, if you have the microphone.
However, at that time, when you did not know God, you were slaves to those which by nature are no gods. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how is it that you turn back again to the weak and worthless elemental things, to which you desire to be enslaved all over again? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you that perhaps I have labored over you in vain.
I believe as we've been working through Galatians, and even here in chapter 4, we need to keep our bearings as to the parts of a synagogue, or the parts of the groups in the synagogue that Paul is addressing, the groups in these assemblies in Galatia. So you would have native-born Jews, you would have proselytes who had become Jewish through conversion. You would have God-fearers who were tempted to do that. But do we really go? And so here I believe he's addressing Gentiles, whether those who became proselytes, who became Jewish, or Gentiles who are still God-fearers. And so he says, previously you were slaves to those which by nature are no gods. Paul shifts his address to God-fearers who are still struggling with the demands of paganism. Verse 8, when you did not know the God of Israel, you were polytheists, serving false gods, including Caesar, which are not gods at all. Okay, so I'm giving a brief commentary on each verse as we go through. Please, if you want, if you just you want to say, well, there's something more here, and Steve, I don't mind your notes. So.
Well, it does, and this is making perfect sense to me. Many claim that this passage is referring to Jewish days of worship. However, upon a closer look at the text, Paul conveys a much different message. The days, months, times, and
years of verse 10 are in fact Celtic days of worship. I see that as we're meeting here on the Sabbath, and we're celebrating God's feast days instead of how I'm going to say start to not put so much emphasis on Christmas or Easter or other days that the pagans put emphasis on. As seen in verse, these people once served gods that were not existent to their conversion to the truth. This alone reveals that the days mentioned here in verse 10 were not those days established by God and the only true God. Yeah.
Okay.
I won't use these.
Yeah, no, very, very good. I think we are going exactly where in that direction. And so verse 9, now that you've come to know God, or rather be known by God. So we cannot place ourselves back in that world. We just are unable to, because our world is moving in that direction, and we probably could go out someplace in Marion and grab somebody and say, and they are living in the context of that world. But if you've had any time in church or association with Christianity at all, we have trouble placing ourselves back in that world where, who's this God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? I don't know. So Paul says, you've come to know God. You now know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But more than that, you're known by him as his children, fully able to cry out, Abba. Jeff, were you? Oh, you weren't. Okay.
So
okay.
What I was going to comment on is in many aspects, we accept in our society, and in much of our Christian society, some of these paganistic things that we don't even give a second thought to. We put a Christian stamp on Halloween, calling it All Saints Night. We have a large segment of Christians who celebrate the Night of the Dead, along with the Mexican church there. And Mardi Gras, how many people don't bat an eye about Mardi Gras? Oh, that's going to be fun. We're going to go celebrate it. But isn't that another one of these pagan events that has somehow got a pseudo-Christian stamp put upon it that says it's okay? You can do that. You're being a Christian somehow by doing that. I think those are some of the things that Paul is speaking against.
Yeah, no, certainly. And you are right there. I'm sorry, I kind of overlooked some of those obvious things in our culture. I think there's a lot in our culture, though, that we have not uncovered. We really need to be asking the Lord to reveal to us where we need to set ourselves apart. And by setting ourselves apart, am I meaning acting with righteousness so that I have salvation? No. Just as God is set apart, other, completely outside of his creation, but working in his creation, so he asks us to be like him. Set apart from what is not his, even though we have to work within it. I flipped the slide just before Jeff started talking. So verses 9 and 8, or 9 and 10. How is it that you turn back again to the weak and worthless elemental things to which you desire to be enslaved all over again? You observed the days, months, seasons, years. This is what we're talking about. And so I'm saying, what are these worthless and elemental things that involve days, months, and years? And as we push on, elemental things also appears with respect to the Jewish believers in verse 3. So also we, while we were children, we were held in bondage under the elemental things of the world. So this is where the real rub is in the interpretation, is because, well, if the Jews were under elemental things, what were they under? They were under Torah. And so you guys must be trying to slide into, no, these elemental things are things of the world. This is elemental things of the world, not of God. The Torah is of God. Elemental things of the world that we need to separate ourselves from. And we go on with, I say, okay, so what are they? We're going to go and take a look here. many suggestions, but we offer two interpretations for Galatians 4:9. The first interpretation is the common, I'm going to say classic Christian interpretation. This is observance of Torah. You're yielding to the influencers who are driving you to become Jewish and to observe Sabbath, new moons, festivals, 7 days of unleavened bread, counting the Omer, days of awe, 7 days of booths, and sabbatical years. Okay. I say, how do you respond to this interpretation? What internal support does it have? Does it have any weaknesses? And I suppose I should have taken time to answer each one of those questions, but I did not. Because how would you respond to this interpretation? Steve's already read a response. Jeff has helped us with a response as to what may have been in mind. But
Yeah, I think you have to take it as a total. You can't stop at one little sentence or one little phrase and say, look, see, this is what it says. It's the total.
yes.
What does it say as its whole? I'm getting told to pick up the mic. Yeah, I think it's a total thing, and if you take it in its total, it clearly points back to something other than Torah, and even if you go back just a few verses, it's Paul is not ever saying the law is worthless, throw it away. Well, if the law is not worthless and don't throw it away, of course, if he was saying that, he would be disqualified from anything. If it's not worthless, if it has value, then how can you start saying, well, God may have told us this and it is valuable, but God told us this and it's worthless. Don't do it.
Yeah.
It's either valuable or not valuable. And Paul consistently says it is valuable. So if it is valuable, how can you then start parsing it out and saying, well, these large sections of it have no relevance. We're just going to take the things that we like, and we're going to disregard everything we don't like.
Well, yeah, I think you put your finger right on the issue. Is we need to take Galatians as a whole. We need to take Paul as a whole. We can't take something like this reference to elemental things of the world. I mean, if it said elemental things of God, well, then I might say, we better really think carefully about what this is. But so the internal support says this is wrong. By internal support, what has Paul been saying? Has he condemned the law? Has he said the law never should have been given? No. He says the law is good and perfect and righteous.
I'm thinking that it takes us back even a little bit further than that to the time that Jesus was teaching the apostles, and his whole premise was, I didn't come to change the law. I came to teach you how to observe.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus did all these festivals. He observed the law. He never came to change that, and he never abolished
Mm-hmm.
that.
And
that's
yeah.
Paul's teaching.
And that's I mean, you're right. You're stepping us out of, okay, so we, when you're working with a tough text, you work within the book, then you work within the greater corpus of the author, and now you're working within the greater corpus of the apostolic scriptures, and you're saying, hey, look, we're back here, and the one that we follow was observant. Yeah. The only difference being, he did it perfectly. Yeah, thank you. Okay, does it have weaknesses? Yes, indeed it does. It's picking and choosing rather than reading as a whole. The Messianic interpretation recognizes that the Gentiles in the Roman world were polytheistic idolaters required by law to participate in the Roman cult and the worship of the emperor. They needed to be part of an approved religious affiliation, all of which were idolatrous and polytheistic except Judaism. If they were Jews, they were exempt from the polytheistic world around them. That's why it was so attractive to become a Jew. But it was unattractive to become a Jew because of family and the city you lived in and the business you worked for, because so actually I'm going to say that, well, I'm just going to go on because we're getting bogged down. The weak and worthless elementary principles of the world are the idolatrous rituals and religion from which the God-fearing Gentiles had recently come. In that case, the days and months and seasons and years which the Gentiles were observing were observing and becoming enslaved to once more must be pagan holidays and celebrations. I don't know if I should. I checked Daniel's book on, because I popped in 2 full slides. I don't know if you guys are up to me reading this or not. Okay. I got 2 votes for yes. Okay, more. Okay. So he says, the God-fearing Gentile believers were, of course, ex-pagans who participated in the imperial cult, worshiping the gods and the emperors as required by law. It was a critically important part of their previous life, as much as a center to our society as getting a driver's license or a social security number is to ours. Observing the calendar of the imperial cult was a required civic duty. To abstain from participation in these civic religious functions disrupted relationships with family, friends, business associates, and civic authorities. It also placed a person in jeopardy of persecution, arrest, and possibly execution for the crime of atheism. Jews were called atheists because they denied all the gods except for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Roman law exempted only Jews from participation. The Galatian Gentile believers were not legally recognized converts to Judaism. They were God-fearers, guests in the synagogue, so to speak. Though the Jewish community might have granted them the honorary guest status in the synagogues as God-fearers, that was not official legal status or a religion in pagan governmental and societal eyes. I threw that in. Claiming I'm a God-fearer would not exempt them from the duty of observing the imperial cult. This left the God-fearing believers in a state of social limbo, not fully accepted by Judaism, and yet at the same time in conflict with the authorities, their extended families, and all the society around them. The solution was to go to the full distance and convert to Judaism. As Jews, they would be free from the pressure to conform to paganism and to observe the imperial cult calendar. The Galatian Gentile believers felt forced to choose between 2 options. 1, convert to Judaism and become legally Jewish, or 2, at least nominally, observe the calendar of the imperial cult. Apparently, Paul was concerned that most of his readers were considering the former route. It may be that many others had already gone back to observing the events of the imperial cult and the calendar of days, months, seasons, and years, and their appropriate observances alongside their faith in Messiah. They were effectively trying to live in both worlds. This is what Jeff was smacking at when he was naming some of the things that there is so much syncretism, particularly in. We need to find where we are bringing together faith and world too, and separate that out. But I'm going to say particularly in Roman Catholicism, when you go into anywhere it goes, there's an embracing of a Christian truth, but you're combining it with the past, with the past beliefs that you had. Now, I have a whole book if you want to read that. All right, so they were effectively trying to bring both, trying to live in both worlds. It's an easy thing for the polytheistic mind to do, worship these gods one day and this God another day. If this is the case, then it is possible that we should read the Epistle to the Galatians as an address to both groups, arguing against both options and calling for a third option. Paul's third option calls for an identity in Messiah that completely breaks with those that are by nature that by nature are not gods, to which they were formerly enslaved, but it also maintains a distinct Gentile identity by not becoming Jewish. If so, Paul warned the Galatian Gentiles not to return to observing the days of the imperial cult. This, he argues, would be a return to enslavement under those who are by nature not gods. That is, the emperor seen as a deity. Do you want to be their slaves all over again? He asked. All right. We're moving on to our next. I see a transition taking place in verse 12. Depend on Messiah as I do. Your wrong is not against me. Excuse me. So we're making this transition from the section 8 through 11 to the following section. And so I give you one verse. Read it, Jeff, and hang on to the microphone.
I beg of you, brethren, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You have done me no wrong. So
take a look at the various italics I have in there. Become as I, for I also as you, you have done me no wrong. So of course, I mean, it's not a big thing to be dropping out verbs of being. That's very common in Hebrew, and Paul's carrying it over into Greek, and I'm discovering that at least in Paul's work, it is very common in Greek to drop out verbs of being. But for me, it changes the reading just a little bit, the literal Greek. Be as I, for also as you, brethren, I entreat you, in nothing me have you wronged. Let me try that again. So I read better when I was alone. Be as I, for I also as you. There it is. Be as I, for I also as you. Brethren, I entreat you, in nothing me have you wronged. There it is. Worked pretty well that time. I hope you understood that. Here's verse 12 in present English word order with amplification would be as I, who am observant of God's Torah, but completely dependent on Messiah Yeshua for my sonship. For I also as you, who must be fully dependent on Messiah Yeshua for your sonship. That's one possibility. I think perhaps another possibility that may be stronger is this. Be as I, who suffered loss of status among the Jews by eating with you and fellowshipping with you. For I also as you, who have lost status in the Roman world and risked danger and shunning for no longer participating in the Roman cult and the pagan temples. I think that's stronger within the context. And you see, I mean, now you say, wait, how can you add so much to a biblical text? Well, I didn't add to the biblical text. I'm trying to interpret the biblical text. But we are not living in the Galatian society. We are not feeling the pressure, and all Paul had to say was, be as I, for I also as you, brethren. You know the troubles you've had. Okay. In nothing me have you wronged. Your offense is against the gospel itself. You are turning back from dependence on Messiah. You find that in preceding verses. Indeed, you did me good. Verses 13 to 14. When I came to you sick, you cared for me. All right. Anybody have any comment? I mean, do you want to comment on that? Which of the two do you like?
I like the second one. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but when I started coming here to Marine Bible, my mom, the first thing she asked me, did you join a cult?
Yeah.
So I see I see this with what he's saying. And now we do all the festivals, and it's like, what are you doing? You're not putting no emphasis on Christmas. You're not putting no emphasis on Easter. You're not doing the Day of the Dead. You're not doing this. You're doing these festivals. What are them? And it's like, well, I see what he's saying there. I think that I suffered loss among the staff with you, but with you guys. I don't go to Bob Evans on Sunday now and eat with people getting out of church. It's like,
Thank you. I mean, that's a very good statement, and there are very few who actually come into the Messianic movement and don't have a similar experience. And I've joked before, but we were trying to be observant of food laws long before we walked out of the Baptist church, and there were frequent potlucks, and it's really a hard thing to be at a church potluck, and you're kind of looking on every pot of baked. There's 4 pots of baked beans brought by 4 different people, and you're looking and looking and looking, and but no, I mean, and that's a silly illustration. But there is a setting apart that we are doing, and it's not working out our salvation. It's saying because God has a claim on my life as a child, I want to set myself apart as He would have me be, and we need more separation. I mean, the whole of the American church, the whole of the church around the world needs more separation from the world. Not separation in terms of we don't associate with them, but separation in terms of I don't follow their ways.
That's becoming more progressive with what the churches are accepting, the filtration of the doctrine itself. And I mean, I'm with Steve. When I first started coming to Sabbath service on Saturday, my grandchildren, my family, it's like, what are you doing? Why Saturday? Why not Sunday? Because we've been so conditioned in this country that Sunday is the Lord's Day, and it was quite a bit of a transition. And it's still, because of being unevenly yoked, it still possesses challenges.
Yeah.
Especially, with Passover, with honoring the traditional Jewish holidays. It's like, what are you doing? Doing what I'm supposed to be.
I always like what one of my friends said. These are not Jewish holidays. They are the Lord's holidays. He's the one that defined them. So, it's just
And that's a good way to express that. Thank you.
and I don't mean to get us off on a rabbit trail, but aren't we going to celebrate some of these feasts in heaven? And I've heard somebody say, why not start practicing now?
Yeah. And the no, that's a
Or in the millennial kingdom.
yeah. And this becomes a increasingly difficult thing for me to define when, what is heaven? Is it the millennial kingdom? And then as 1 Corinthians 15 says, once our Master Yeshua has placed all things in subjection under His feet, He will turn it over to the Father. He'll turn the kingdom over to the Father, and we're suddenly in the eternal state. But back to just to back up what Steve was saying. Well, I won't turn there, but Isaiah 66, the last, the verse 23, verses 22, 23 of Isaiah 66 say that, in this new heavens and new earth, and that sounds like, I think that sounds like heaven sometimes I think it sounds like millennial kingdom. In the new heavens and the new earth, we'll be keeping the Sabbaths and the new moons, and if you're keeping new moon, you're certainly keeping the other festivals. Zechariah 14 says those who don't go up to tabernacles, those nations that don't recognize tabernacles, they will be disciplined. Yeah. So yeah, it is something that we should be practicing, getting ready for. All right, so I'm trying to get this to advance. And so we're moving on to remember my arrival in Galatia. Another historical issue in Paul's book of Galatians that we have no information on. He says, you received the gospel when you took care of me. Why has your attitude changed? Recognize motives. They to harm, but I to form Messiah in you. The influencers who are trying to get you to convert are going to harm you, but I am trying to form Messiah in you. And so we start with the first one there. Remember my arrival in Galatia. You received the gospel when you took care of me.
But you know that it was because of a bodily illness that I preached the gospel to you the first time, and that which was a trial to you in my bodily condition, you did not despise or loathe, but you received me as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus.
All right, so Paul narrated his and Barnabas's first journey to Luke. He failed to mention, or when Paul narrated, I'm saying Paul narrated to Luke, but Luke wrote down this is what the first journey was. Luke wasn't on that first journey. We find Luke later as a traveling companion of Paul, but at that time he wasn't. So Paul must have told him about it as they traveled together later. Luke says, tell me the first time you and Barnabas went out. I'm really interested in how that was when you... And so... I say he failed to mention that he came to Galatia, Pisidian Antioch, and perhaps Iconium and Lystra sick. But now as he pleads with the Galatians, he reminds them of the exchange they made. They cared for him, and he gave them the good news of Messiah Yeshua. It doesn't say in the book of Acts Paul arrived sick. But he evidently did, based on this text here. And who knows what it was. I mean, the journey from Perga up to Pisidian Antioch could easily have, maybe they fell among thieves, maybe he was beaten, maybe he arrives injured, maybe picks up a flu on the way.
I think it might be something more consequential, because it says you did not despise or loathe. That might have indicated that he had some unclean kind of ailment.
Although they I mean, that's a possibility, but if he's talking now to God-fearers, there would not be a Jewish uncleanness as an issue, but
were they God-fearers already when he first talked to them?
Well,
were they people in attendance at a synagogue and then became believers in Christ?
Yeah, I'm going to draw the line with if you begin Gentile, you have three routes. You either convert to Judaism and now you're a Jew, and then unclean issues would matter. Or the second one is you are attracted to Judaism and you become a God-fearer, so that you say, I'm really wanting to separate myself from the pagan gods, the polytheistic world around me, and I want to honor the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But I am not, I have not converted. Or you say, I'm staying in the pagan world. I'm staying in the polytheistic world where, but it's Jeff. I don't. It's a good thought. I mean, you did not despise or loathe, and I mean, it could. Yeah, you're thinking, Jeff. I mean, I think your mind was going to a potential like a skin disease or something that would have made him unclean, or
one of those, or one that when you see a person that has this disfiguring thing, you just shudder. I don't want anything to do with that guy. Whether it would make you unclean to go to temple services, or whether it would just make you be repulsed because of the obvious and visible illness that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody with chicken pox all over their face, you may not want to go real close to that person.
I mean, I could see him showing up with a very weakened condition with some sort of virus he had picked up, and he could be very.
Was it not uncommon for them to pick up like viruses or stomach ailments from water that they traveled with in certain
Yeah,
containers,
yeah.
things like that, and that's why Scripture will read, put a little water, put a little wine in your water for your often stomach infirmities. From the alcohol in the wine, purifying the water, killing
Yeah.
the water.
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point. You make a good point there, and I guess that's what I'm imagining is we all wish he would have told us. He didn't. He does explain elsewhere, things that he suffered. He says, on frequent journeys, in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from countrymen, dangers from Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers among the false brethren. So I'm saying perhaps on this journey, he fell sick, fell among the hands of robbers. He arrived in physically weak, in need when he got there. And water would be certainly an issue, yes. There are different microbes and different waters. He says, you received me as Christ Jesus. Perhaps an allusion to the Master's own words, he who receives you receives me. We're stepping on then to why has your attitude changed?
Where then is that sense of blessing you had? For I bear you witness that, if possible, you would have plucked out your eyes and given them to me. So I have become your enemy by telling you the truth?
All right. So now this, of course, sense of blessing you had. As you ministered to me and heard the good news, you responded enthusiastically as I declared that through Messiah Yeshua you had standing in the commonwealth of Israel and position in the kingdom of God. So what they were hearing from Paul was attractive. But now something's changed. You don't have that sense of blessing anymore. So then, plucked out your eyes and given them to me. Was his illness related? It was his illness eye related, perhaps from his blindness. This is often stated, and in chapter 6, verse 11, he says, "See with what large letters I am writing to you with my own hand." But some say, this must be it because of the eye damage he suffered with the great light on the road to Damascus. But there was a healing there. I don't know. Well, maybe God left him with or is plucking out the eye just overstatement? Like, man, that guy'd give you his right arm.
He could have been disfigured from some of the previous list that you listened to.
Yeah. Yeah, he wasn't, yeah, you're right. Yes, you're right. Okay, become your enemy. But now Paul walks the same path as all prophets of God. When he speaks the truth and opposes the conversion to Judaism that they are inclined to undergo, they reject him. So all of God's prophets suffered, so the Master says, and so we can go back and see the need to use the microphone. Okay. So we need to move that microphone around. There's two mics here. There's a reading mic, and then there's a running mic. And we need a runner. Rachel's going to be the runner. All right, the runner mic has now become the reading mic, and the reading mic has become the runner mic. So we're on to recognize motives. They to harm, I to form Messiah in you. So who's reading it? Okay.
They eagerly seek you, not commendably, but they wish to shut you out so that you will seek them. It is good always to be eagerly sought in a commendable manner, and not only when I am present with you. My children, with whom I am again in labor until Christ is formed in you, but I could wish to be present with you now and to change my tone, for I am perplexed about you.
So they eagerly seek you, not commendably, but they wish to shut you out so that you seek them. It's an interesting relationship. It's not too difficult a human relationship to understand. I changed that. I'm offering. I think this is my translation of verse 17. They are zealous for you, not for good, but they desire to exclude you so that you may be zealous for them. So the influencers want the God-fearers to convert to Judaism as they did. Hence, they tell the God-fearers, hey, you're no longer part of the kingdom of God. You're excluded because you are not in the club with us. So the God-fearers will then pursue the influencers to say, well, how did you do it? I want to do it too. You know, I think that's perhaps what's going on in verse 17. Any other thoughts on verse 17? Translation of verse 18. Now it is good to be zealous in good, and not only when I am present with you. Zeal is not a problem, but zeal for the wrong thing is a problem. Paul says, when I was there, you were zealous for good. That is, right understanding. And you must continue to be zealous for good. Now, we're just flowing along here. So, I evidently have something. This is still the same. I have evidently there. Okay. Verse 19a. My children with whom I am again in labor. He pulls out a figure of speech, doesn't he? So it's a childbirth figure. The mother gives birth. She's in pain as she gives birth. But now Paul says, wait a minute, am I having to give birth again? That was painful. Paul uses childbirth figuratively. I was in labor bringing you into new life in Messiah, and now I find that I am in labor with you again as I attempt to bring you into maturity in Messiah? Verse 18, until Christ is formed in you. How is Messiah formed in a believer or inside a body of believers? What is the goal? Paul's alluding to discipleship, I believe. A pupil is not above his teacher, but everyone, after he's been fully trained, will be like his teacher. So we should understand from that, I'm trying to form Messiah in you. I'm trying to have you become true disciples of Messiah so that you will be like him. So then I have my own righteousness and I don't need his? No. He is still the righteous one, but as he set himself apart to be like the Father, so you are to set yourself apart and be like the Father. You guys, I mean, I don't mean to just rush off, but Christ formed in you. I think maybe, I thought I had another verse on that, but maybe Paul feared that the Galatian Gentiles were trading their identity in Messiah for identity in Judaism. The great danger was that Messiah might not be fully formed in them. Their Jewish identity might become fully formed, but Messiah might be set aside. That's a good opportunity, a good point, isn't it? I think it's a good point. I mean, you can be a good Baptist, but not be a good disciple. Not picking on Baptists. I'll go to some other.
Going back to Verberg's book, Walking in the Dust
Of the Messiah. Walking in the dust of the Messiah, and they would have been thinking about that. That's how they tried to become like their teacher, rabbi, walking in the dust of the rabbi. That's what the book was.
Yeah, no, is it walking in the dust or sitting at the? No, there's sitting at the feet, and then there's walking in the dust.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, you're right, and it's. I mean, it's a little bit crass, maybe, but it goes so far. I mean, there's this one rabbinic story about a disciple following his sage into the privy, and he came out and he was kind of rebuked by the others. He says, "Well, I want to know how to do it." I mean, in terms of the blessing that would be spoken, because you come out of the privy. There's about a 6-line blessing you're supposed to pronounce, and so it's how did Jesus pray? Don't we wish we knew more about how he prayed? How did Jesus observe the Sabbath? Don't we wish we knew more of how he observed the Sabbath? How, the festivals, it's like we have the Gospels and we have the testimony of the apostles, but we don't have an embodied teacher with us to watch and to see and to learn. And I almost think it's on purpose, I suppose. I mean, God wants us to dig in his scriptures, because at one time in my walk I woke up and said, well, you know what? If Jesus fulfilled the law perfectly, he is the law. And if we want to be like him, we should be studying the law. And not just studying it, but doing it. Yeah. Okay. How does the body of Messiah, us, face a similar danger today to what is up above there? The great danger was that Messiah might not be fully formed in them. Their Jewish identity might become fully formed. They might do everything correct as a Jew, but Messiah might be set aside. What does the body of Messiah face? How do we face a similar danger today? I got some ideas, but here, let me see if I make the
So
thing
do
go.
I. May I?
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just thinking of all of the books that people write with their interpretations, and so many times those books are given precedence over what it says in the Bible.
Yeah. Certainly, yeah. Yeah. I went to more mundane complaints. The nominal Christian requires no separation from the world, or very little separation from the world. The average believer has no compulsion to become like the Master. Do we even know his teachings? Oh, I wish when I was a young kid, I'd memorized the Gospels. You know, I did at one time, memorize 1 John, 2 Peter, Colossians, the first part of Hebrews. But, why didn't I memorize the Gospels? Why didn't I at least memorize the sayings of the Master so that I could speak them correctly and try to live based, on, okay, do we even know his teachings? Believers behave like the world. No, I'm just ranting now. With the same worldly ways, the same worldly entertainments, the same low standards, the same types of materialism, the same rates of marriage failure, the same petty quarrels. Why is this? Where is our goal to be like the Messiah? Paul made a statement in Galatians 2:20. He said, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So I lay down my life, Paul says, so that Messiah might live in me. He really did. Think about what he set aside. Status among the sages of Jerusalem. Everything he'd worked for. Everything his parents had hoped for. As he was a precocious child and showed his ability to learn and memorize and debate. And he gives it up to preach the offense of the cross. At MBF, our goal is to build up the body of Messiah until we all arrive unto the unity of the faithfulness and the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a mature person, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Messiah. But we have a long ways to go. All right. Where are we at? Okay. So we can finish this next section, and then I went. So look at our big points as we step through chapter 4. How can anyone become a son of God? How can God-fearers combine sonship with paganism? The transition. Depend on Messiah as I do. Your wrong is not against me. Remember my arrival in Galatia. Will you be enslaved or the free son? So finishing up chapter 4, and I went into chapter 5:1. I don't know if that's correct or not, but it sure seemed like it should be correct. I put the whole thing up so we could read it as well. No, I guess it isn't the whole thing. I put up the first. Oh, wait a minute. What's going on here? Let me check. Let me go back here. Underneath that we have allegory on two covenants. Allegory on two covenants. This is what I put up. I put up the whole thing of the allegory. So let's look at this allegory. Paul's allegory on two covenants. And I put up the whole of the allegory and his interpretation. So let's hear this.
You who want to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the bondwoman and one by the free woman. But the son by the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and the son by the free woman through the promise. This is allegorically speaking, for these are 2 covenants, one from Mount Sinai, bearing children who are to be slaves. She is Hagar. Now this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother, mother of all of us. For it is written, Rejoice, barren woman who does not bear. Break forth and shout, you who are not in labor, for more numerous are the children of the desolate than the one who has a husband, citing Isaiah 54:1. And you, we brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise.
All right. Thank you. I should have warned you. What I have here is, this is a variant reading in the text, and it struck my curiosity. That's why I put them in as possibilities, and we'll look at that. We'll look at that later. It's not a big difference, but you know, it's something that a translator has to decide. What am I going to use? So the allegory on two covenants. Tell me, you who want to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? This is where it starts, and we, in the Galatian community of native-born Jews, Gentile proselytes to Judaism, and God-fearers, who was it that was wanting or desiring to be under the law? Some were under the law. Who was it that was wanting to be under the law? The God-fearers, right? Just say it together. The God-fearers. So he's back to addressing the God-fearers. How does Paul use the term under the law? And we've already defined that. One who is legally Jewish in both the eyes of Judaism and the Roman authorities. So tell me, you who want to be under the law or desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? Well, what does Paul mean, do you not listen to the law? And I think you gotta stick with the context. You just gotta stick with the context. You gotta say, okay, what comes next? And he's about to offer an interpretation on the story of Abraham, his two wives, and his two sons. Where do we find that story? In the law, in Genesis. And so, do you not listen to the law? Aren't you familiar with this? Haven't you heard about Abraham and Hagar and Ishmael and Abraham and Sarah and Isaac? Well, I have something to tell you about them. So we go on to allegory on two covenants, two women and two sons. See, haven't you listened to the law? For it is written. Okay, let's hear this.
For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by the bondwoman and one by the free woman. But the son by the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and the son by the free woman through the promise.
All right, I'm going to run through. I didn't know where to put in my interpretation of the entire allegory, but I decided to put it in here, and so I'm running through. We have it laid out for us in skeletal form right now. So there were two sons, one by a bondwoman, one by a free woman. The son of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, the son of the free woman according to promise. And so let's take a look. The bondwoman was Hagar, and Hagar bears Ishmael, and Ishmael, or she does so by physical effort. So there's nothing wrong with the flesh here, born according to the flesh. That's just the way it happens. It takes physical union, it takes a lot of pain. So this one was born according to the flesh. Then we have the other woman, the free woman, that's Sarah, and she bears Isaac. She does so by promise or miracle. Now, the reason that holds, I mean, obviously there had to be the same issues as with Hagar, but Sarah shouldn't have been able to bear. Abraham himself was old. They're both old, ancient. So I'm going to give you the interpretation. Let's start with a Gentile. Under the law, becomes a son of Abraham by a physical act, circumcision, baptism. A Gentile, by Messiah, becomes a son of Abraham by Abraham's promise. So there, I've laid out the way I'm going to understand this this allegory on the two covenants. So we're going on then to details, but we're returning to the theme of promise. So let me remind you of the theme of promise. Remember I said we have promise 11 times in Galatians 3 and 4. And we only have 3 uses of promise left. We get those, here we're back in Galatians 3 when the promise was introduced. So now the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. He does not say, and to seeds as to many, but to one, and to your seed, that is Christ. What I am saying is this: the law, which came 430 years later, does not invalidate a covenant previously ratified by God so as to nullify the promise. Excuse me. For if the inheritance is based on law, it is no longer based on promise, but God has granted it to Abraham by means of promise. That's one significant text on the promise that we're looking at now. The son of the free woman the son by the free woman through the promise. Here's another one. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's descendant, heirs according to the promise. These all are in chapter 3. Chapter 3 ends with that verse that we just looked at. And so now we're going to, in chapter 4, it lies ahead of us yet. We brethren, like Isaac, are children of the promise. All right, so we're back to the promise theme. I'm moving on to his analogy of Hagar. Hagar, Mount Sinai, present Jerusalem, slavery. So he's making these equivalences. Hagar is like Mount Sinai, which is like the present Jerusalem, which is like slavery. All right, so how has the church misinterpreted the two covenants? Oh, we didn't read this. Sorry.
This is allegorically speaking, for these are two covenants. One from Mount Sinai bearing children who are to be slaves. She is Hagar. Now this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children.
Yeah. So two covenants. I'm speaking about two covenants. Get it? I'm not just speaking about two women. I'm speaking about two covenants. And one is from Mount Sinai. And so I say, how does the church interpret the two covenants since the 2nd century? Well, it's Old Testament versus New Testament, or it's Old Covenant versus New Covenant. It's Old Covenant. The Old Covenant is Hagar, present Jerusalem equals Judaism. The New Covenant and Ishmael, Jews in slavery to Torah. The New Covenant is Sarah, or Jerusalem above, equals Christianity. And Isaac, Christians under grace are free from the law. Now that may be, I don't think that's
Sinai is the law.
That's where it comes from. Sinai is the law. Yeah. Sinai is the law. Let's push on here. What are the two covenants that Paul has discussed in Galatians? What are the two covenants that Paul has discussed already in Galatians? Rachel, do you want to? Okay. The Abrahamic covenant, which was not invalidated by the Sinai covenant, which came 430 years later. Paul has already argued that. There are two covenants. There's the Abrahamic covenant, which is a covenant that involves a promise of seed to Abraham through whom all nations would be blessed. And Abraham accepted that covenant. He believed God and was counted unto him for righteousness. So there's the pattern of that covenant. This returns us to our promise theme. What I'm saying is this: the law, which came 430 years later, does not invalidate a covenant previously ratified by God so as to nullify the promise. We're moving on to Jerusalem above, our free mother, Isaac. So we're looking at the other side now of this allegory.
But the Jerusalem above is free, she is our mother. For it is written, Rejoice, barren woman who does not bear. Break forth and shout, you are not in labor. For more numerous are the children of the desolate than the one who was a husband. And you, brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise.
We should never have launched into this because we're running out of time. Let me see if we just get through the allegory. I don't know if we can. Paul does not work to balance the allegory like many of us would. I mean, if I'd been writing this, I would have had Hagar equals Mount Sinai equals present Jerusalem equals Ishmael in slavery. Sarah equals promise to Abraham. Jerusalem above, and Isaac in freedom. Why did Paul shift from this nice parallel that he should have put in there so it was comfortable for us to understand? He wanted to get to the two Jerusalems. Why not stick with our balanced allegory above? We need the two Jerusalems. Jerusalem above, our free mother, Isaac, the child of promise. And so Paul wanted to take us to Isaiah 54, probably just 1 through 3, but I like verse 4 as well, in which Sarah is represented by barren Jerusalem, who wonders at all the unnatural children she has received. So here it is. For it is written, Rejoice, barren woman who does not bear. Oh, that's Sarah. Break forth and shout, you who are in labor. Well, wait a minute. It's really Jerusalem. He's talking to Jerusalem. For more numerous are the children of the desolate than the one who has a husband. You're the desolate one. Your children are going to be more numerous. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch out the curtains of your dwelling. Spare not. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your pegs. For you will spread abroad to the right and to the left, and your descendants will possess nations. Well, that's what we're after. Paul's after the fact that the Jerusalem of promise, Jerusalem of above, will involve the nations and will resettle the desolate cities. Fear not, for you will not be put to shame. Do not feel humiliated, for you will not be disgraced, but you will forget the shame of your youth, and the reproach of your motherhood or widowhood you will remember no more. So it's an interesting it's an interesting application of the issues of Sarah on top of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, in Isaiah's prophecy, he knows it's going to be desolated by the Babylonians, but he also sees that it's going to be restored by King Messiah. Two more curiosities from textual criticism, which we better not even look at. I'm going to shut down here. Maybe we'll have to, I don't know, maybe we'll have to, sorry we shouldn't have launched into this section. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for some good interaction, some heavy wading through Paul's logic and thoughts. And Lord, we come out understanding that we have life through the faithful one. And as we grow in maturity in him, we walk after him and practice our faith as he practiced his. Father, as we continue to consider Galatians and think about it, may our thinking mature in it, we pray. Because he is the promise.